Hello, nonlinear. This is a continuation on section 8.4. We already did 8.4a, and this is going to be section 8.4b. In order to really understand 8.4a, let's kind of recap 8.4a so we can understand 8.4b. Remember last class we talked about something called the zero product property. What the zero product property states is that if you have two numbers and they're multiplied together and they equal zero, then one of the two numbers must have been zero. Okay? We talked last time about how if you guys can think of any numbers that when you multiply them together they equal zero and neither of the numbers were zero in the first place, if you guys can think of a scenario where that happens, you and I are going to be very rich because we can write a math paper together. It'll be really exciting. So, for what we know, this has to be true. So, what we were able to do was solve statements like this, where it said x plus 3 is being multiplied by x minus 5 and it equals 0. Then, either this must be 0 or this must be 0, because these are the two things that are being multiplied. And we could ask the question, what makes this first one 0? And we get negative 3. What makes this one 0? 5. These are our two answers, negative 3 and 5. So we're going to continue to use that in this lecture. We're also going to use another idea that we talked about, which was factoring out the greatest common factor. In the second half of the lecture, I gave you problems that looked like this, and I said, okay, you guys should be able to undo the distributive property by taking out the GCF. The GCF is the greatest common factor. If we were to consider the numbers 6x and 15x, they have x in common. So we're going to take an x out front, in front of the parentheses, and they also have a factor of 3 in common because 3 is a factor of 6 and 3 is a factor of 15. So then we have to kind of think through the distributive property. What would we multiply 3x by to get 2x, or to get 6x, and that would be 2. And what would we multiply 3x by to get 15x, and that would be 5. So this is a kind of a trick that we have that is undoing the distributive property. It might seem counterintuitive, right? This actually looks more complicated than this top one, but it is a skill that we need to develop in order to answer the questions we're trying to answer in the next couple sections. Let's do one more of those. These have 5x in common, so we should be able to take 5x out. If we took a 5x out, we'd have a 2x here because 2 times 5 is 10, and x times x gives us that x squared plus 3. Okay, how are we going to use this? Well, let's pretend that this says minus 36x. Okay, so if we were to look at this and say, okay, what does this and this have in common? What's the greatest common factor? And undo the distributive property here, you guys would probably say, well, x is the only thing they have in common. That would be correct. If we took out an x out in front of the parentheses, we'd be left with x minus 36 here. You guys with me? If we were to distribute this x back in, x times x is x squared, and x times negative 36 is negative 36x. So we did that distributive property, that undoing it process right there. Now we're going to use the zero product property, which says that if we have something and we multiply it by something else and it equals 0, then this must have been 0. Well, what makes x 0? What could we plug in to get 0 there? It would just be 0. What could we plug into this x to make it 0? That one would be 36. Our answers are 0 and 36. Let's try this other one here. What is the greatest common factor of 3y cubed and 9y squared? Well, they both have y squared in common, right? This one has actually 3 y's and this one has 2. But in common, they have 2. And what's the greatest common factor of 3 and 9? Well, hopefully you guys are thinking that would be 3 because that would be the right answer. So now we're going to undo that. Undo the distributive property with that. We have to say 3y squared times what would be 3y to the third. We have the 3 we have it already covered, right? So y squared times what is y cubed? That would just be y. 3y squared times y is 3y cubed. Now it's going to be 3y squared times what is 9y squared. In this problem, hopefully you guys are coming up with 3 because 3 times negative 3 gives us that negative 9, and y squared doesn't have anything that we're multiplying by over here, so it'd still be that y squared. Now we get to ask ourselves the same question. Well, this is the zero product property. We have a here, we have b here, and they're being multiplied and equals 0. What would make this one 0? Well, if you square the number 0 and then multiply it by 3, you still have 0. So 0 would make the first part 0, and 3 would make the second part 0. So our answers are 0 and 3. Let's do one more like this before calling it for the new stuff, and we can practice some today. This one is not set equal to 0 on either side. In order for this whole process to work, one side has to be set equal to 0. So let's go ahead and move the 25x squared over by subtracting it on both sides. Then we would have 5x cubed minus 25x squared is equal to 0, and then we can start that process. So once you guys pause it here, give this one a try, see how you do, and if you got it, you should be good for today's lesson. What do these have in common? These have 5x squared in common. If you take out a 5x squared times x would be the 5x cubed, and 5x squared times negative 5, right? Because 5 times negative 5 is negative 25, would be how we would undo the distributive property. Go ahead and ask yourself, what makes this 0? Just 0. What makes this one 0? That would be 5. 0 and 5 would be the answers here. And you could even try this if you wanted to. It's kind of fun. 5 to the third power is 125, and 125 times 5 is 625. You can try it here too. 5 squared, remember order of operations, 5 squared is 25, and 20 times 25 times 25 is also 625. Notice they got the same thing. You could plug in 0 for both of them, and they would also work. 0 cubed times 5 is 0. 0 squared times 25 is 0. 0 and 5 both work. So that is 8.4b. Please let me know if you guys have any questions, and you guys have a good one.